I challenge you to a duel.
Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Movie Duel podcast. My name is Peter and I am your host. On each episode of the Movie Duel podcast we select a subject that are based around films, and then myself and my co-host each pick a film that we think best fits that subject. Only rule being that we can't pick a film that has already been discussed on the podcast. And on this episode, I'll be joined by movie duelist Nicole Davis, in which we'll be talking through our choices for the best comic book film that's non-Marvel or DC. But before we get into that, just a few points of order for this episode. First and foremost, thanks to everybody who retweeted, reposted and shared the last episode. So this time round, the thanks go to Watch It If You Can podcast, Paul from Filmbusters, Film Shrapnel Podcast, Jeff Brandon Warner, Jamie Russell, and the guys over at Movie Drone. Thank you very much for all of those. And thanks to everybody who voted in the poll from our last episode, which was with Vanessa Cordner, and we talked our best movie about addiction choices. With Requiem for a Dream chosen by Vanessa and Trainspotting chosen by myself. It went to the polls and it was a win for Trainspotting, 67% to 33% for Requiem for a Dream. So thank you to everybody who voted in the polls on that. The poll for this episode will be up over the next day or so after the episode's dropped. So please get on and vote and let us know what you think this time round. But we're not just limited to the polls. You can comment on any of our posts across social media, whether that's on Facebook, Instagram, or Threads, where we're at Movie Duel Pod, and on X, Twitter, we are also at Movie Duel Pod. So you can hit us up on there or send us an email to movieduelpodcast@gmail.com. And then finally, just a few notes about this episode. As always, there will be spoilers. We're discussing these films in depth. So if you haven't watched them, I would encourage you to go and watch them before listening to the rest of this episode. And there will be swearing as well. But that's enough of that. We'll head on over to the main discussion, and I hope you enjoy episode 22 of the Movie Duel podcast.
Take this. I don't like horror comics. You'll like this one, Mr. Phoenix. It could save your life.
Okay, so welcome back to Nicole. Nicole, how are you today?
I'm less than 100% well, but better than I've been. So I'm just going to take the win where I can.
Yes, we've just spent a good 5 minutes off mic talking about our ailments for the time being, so we'll not go into too much detail with that. But what have you been up to? Did you have a nice Halloween? We're recording this just a few days after Halloween. Did you get up to much?
Well, that is the high holy holidays around here in Salem, Massachusetts. And it was apparently just as crowded downtown as it's been for the past couple of years since they reinstituted, they call it haunted happenings around here. All the businesses and such focused on Halloween just for the season. And I got to sit out on my porch and freeze my butt off. I think I told you, what was it, Celsius, that it was like 10? And it had previously been 20-something earlier in the week. Yeah, it was cold. So my feet got numb, but I thought it was well worth it because, you know, toward the end of the evening, I had a couple of teenage girls. I would guess they were maybe, I don't know, like 14.
Yeah.
And I gave them extra candy, and I said, you get extra because you're bigger. And one of them looked to the other and said, yes, see, I knew it'd be worth it. And
love it.
I was just, you know, clearly she had to talk her friend into dressing up and going out and walking around. And
It's free candy. It's like free beer. It's,
Yeah, I used to not like it when teenagers would go out and ask for candy. And as I've gotten older, I'm just like, you're only young for such a short time.
Yeah.
You might as well go ahead and extend it. I don't care.
Absolutely. So. I mean, I took my children trick-or-treating and dressed up myself as well, which I sent you a picture of, and the rest of the gang. My son was the Hulk, or Hulk Smash as he calls him. My daughter was quite a convincing Wednesday. She managed to sort of stay in character for about 10 minutes and was just not smiling at all. But that didn't last long. Soon as the sweets and the candy were flying into the bucket, she was smiling from ear to ear. And I dressed up as Michael Myers. Yes. A slightly rotund Michael Myers, I will admit, but
I would have said compact.
Yes, compact, yeah.
Same mass, a little shorter.
But yes, and I managed to stay in character pretty much all the way around. I just sort of stood behind the children and stared at the adults opening the door, which was quite well received in some places. But I just had a tremendous amount of fun, and I'm already thinking my costume. Well, a couple of years back, I went as Jason Voorhees, which it was a very sort of basic Jason Voorhees, very cheap sort of mask and a plastic machete. But actually, as we were walking around, we bumped into somebody who was also dressed as Jason Voorhees, but he was proper full-on cosplay Jason Voorhees with, he had a body bag and the proper mask and everything, and he looked fantastic. But we did have this moment where he was on one side of the street and I was on the other, and we just stopped and stared at each other for about 2 minutes, which was pretty fun. But
excellent.
Nothing this year. I'm thinking maybe Leatherface for next year, but we'll see.
I'll have to get you the right shade of lipstick.
Yes, indeed. So, last time you were here, we were talking Humble Pie, films that we avoided watching but ended up loving. And we couldn't really decide much to tell, so we went to the polls over on X. And it was a score draw, 50-50.
Oh.
So there we go. So still no winner on that one.
The Warriors versus Chud, still undecided which is the better film. No, wait, that's not what that was decided.
Well,
that was not the point of the duel.
No. So obviously last time around that was your choice of subject, so it fell back to me to pick this time around. So the subject that I went for was best comic book movie that isn't based on DC or Marvel, or a DC or Marvel property. So obviously it had to be anything that was there was some sort of sub. Oh God, what's the word?
Imprints.
So imprints, that's it, of DC and Marvel. So it was quite a difficult one to sort of navigate. But how did you find choosing this a film for this subject?
This one came easily to me, but it's because I watch a fair bit of anime. Mm-hmm. So it immediately came to mind which one I should choose in terms of quality, influence, etc., etc., etc.
Okay. I mean, it's very easy to sort of think when you think comic books, obviously the big ones are Marvel and DC, but it's quite surprising how some of the offshoots are, you don't think of them as being sort of anything associated with DC or Marvel.
Right. I think The Crow and Watchmen were out.
Yes, yeah,
kind of thing.
Which were sort of considerations, and I thought about those films when I picked the subject, and obviously when we did a bit of research, it was like, no, we can't do those. But your choice, was it the only choice, or did you have any other considerations?
For me, it was the only choice. Yes. So
without further ado, then, what did you go for?
I chose the 1988 film Akira.
Neo Tokyo is about to explode. Streamlined Pictures presents a state-of-the-art adventure, Akira.
Directed and written by Katsuhiro Otomo, starring the voice talents of Mitsuo Iwata, Nozumo Sasaki, Mami Koyoama, Yuriko Fuchizaki, Kazuhiro Kando, Tatsuhiko Nakamura, Fukue Ito, Taro Ishida, and Mizuho Suzuki. In the main roles in the Japanese language version, there are two different English dubs. The first English dub that was released is usually referred to as the Streamline dub. That's just the distribution company.
Yeah.
And then in 2001, there was a remaster. That is the set that I have. I'm holding up for Peter's benefit. It is the special edition, and the sound is by Pioneer. So it's referred to as the Pioneer dub. And that's the one that has Johnny Youngbosch as Kaneda. And if you follow anime at all, he's done a ton of vocal talent for that. He was also on the American version of Power Rangers. So he's got a lot of experience.
I'm pretty sure the version I watched was the 89 dub, I think. Because I'm pretty sure I recognise Louis Arquette's voice, because he voices the professor or the doctor in that version.
Right.
So that was the only way I think that's the version I watched.
Okay. Yeah, that one's, I find that one a little more, a little grating, I think. It's a little bit too cartoony for me.
Yeah.
But
I can see that.
I mean, if that's the only version you can get, still watch Akira if you get the opportunity. But this one, supposedly, it's a slightly better translation as well as vocal performances. So I have watched this past week in both Japanese and English, just to see if there's a different feel to it one way or the other. And I did feel like I did get a little more meaning out of it for the English version. But I also watched that with the particular version I has what's called the capsule option, where you'll get a little icon pop up on screen when there's extra information to be had. The extra information is almost always going to be just a translation of the graffiti in the background or the signs that people are holding. Yeah. So there's a lot of pro and anti-union sentiments up in the graffiti. There's a lot of anti-imperialist stuff, especially by the revolutionaries. Some anti-capitalist rhetoric, people saying to cancel the Olympics. And that was eerily prescient that this is supposed to take place in a fictional 2019, and they're preparing for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, which in fact was the host city intended for the 2020 Olympics. They had to postpone it a year, but they did in fact have it in Tokyo. So I thought that
eerie.
It was pretty eerie.
It's like Simpsons levels of prediction there.
Yes. Yes, and of course, The Simpsons, being the pop culture pastiche that it is, has several Akira references over the years in it. Yeah. So yes, this movie, I did a little bit of research on the background of it. I watched so many video essays on YouTube, I can't tell you. I would like to recommend two in particular if you're really interested in like the history of how this was made and like cultural context for this. Cinema Tyler's video on the making of called The Techniques That Gave Akira Its Unprecedented Quality. And Super Eye Patch Wolf's video, The Impact of Akira, the Film That Changed Everything. So it is, I don't think you can exaggerate the impact that Akira had on the world of animation when it hit in 1988. It was, I believe, Christmas 1988 in Japan, and then it was released a year later in the US. It didn't do terribly well in cinemas in the United States, but worldwide, and then on home video, it grew by leaps and bounds, and there were, people founded video release labels purely to release Japanese anime out into the world and make some money because more and more people were interested in it. And thus, sort of the explosion in the 1990s.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, I've not seen this film before, watching it for the podcast, before he chose it. But I do know, I've heard that it's a very important film in terms of, progression in cinema, and especially for anime. It's a very important film.
Right. And it is very beautiful. It's incredibly detailed, like obsessively detailed. Some of the backgrounds, when you're watching them, say, riding their bikes through Neo-Tokyo, there are up to 7 layers of cityscape behind them, and they move them relative to one another. The way it looks when you're driving through a city and the buildings seem to move relative to one another as you turn from one street to another. There are buildings in the background painted where the windows are individual dots that were hand painted on there. It's just insanely detailed and so gorgeous. Still holds up. The fluidity of the animation was unprecedented. They did 24 frames per second in most of the shots. Most animation is 12. Sometimes even less, depending on what animation you're watching. And, they spent the most they've ever spent on a Japanese animated feature. They spent, I've seen figures between, in US dollars, 9 and 10 million. Was 1.1 billion yen in 1988. And to give you an idea of that, My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies were both released that same year. Their budgets were each 3.7 million. So they spent more on Akira than those two movies combined, as gorgeous and detailed as those movies are. They spent more, roughly equivalent to the budget of The Secret of Nim that had been, 6 years before that, and how gorgeous that is as well. But not nearly as much as Oliver and Company, which was Disney's big release that year, which was sad. I saw it in the theater, and they spent like 3 times the budget on that, and it doesn't look half as good. They just, had to pay Billy Joel and Cheech Marin a lot of money. But in any case,
dear me,
I'm getting off track here. So they spent a lot of money. It shows. The animation's incredibly fluid. The music is fantastic. The group is called Genio Yamashiro-gumi, which I think just means Yamashiro Group, maybe.
Okay.
The composer and writer is Shoji Yamashiro. It's drawn heavily from Indonesian gamelan music. That's those sort of bamboo percussion sounds that you hear throughout.
Okay, yeah.
There's some no music, Japanese no theater type music. And then there's a lot of these interesting vocals that they do, sort of grunting, guttural, especially with their showdown with the other street gang, the clowns.
Yeah. It's very impactful, you got the sort of drum beats in the opening sort of section and the credits and things. Which, I don't know why, but the opening sort of reminded me of Blade Runner quite a bit. That sort of cityscapes and there's a boom.
It is very cyberpunky.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of neon.
Yeah, I really. It was very. I mean, that opening. I think even it's. I suppose it's sort of revealed, isn't it? That I'm guessing it was supposed to be the creation of Akira in the first instance in '88. I suppose.
Yes.
That's how I sort of understood it, is that what the opening is, and even that just looks really sort of lush. This just explosion of energy that wipes out old Tokyo and leads us to the Neo Tokyo, as they call it.
This movie almost tanked the industry as well with the amount of money that they spent on it. I mean, it was a moderate financial success, but they spent so much money that like some of the companies that had worked on it went out of business because they just couldn't quite recoup their costs and efforts. So there was a dip in animation for a few years, and then it sort of rebounded. Yeah. And that was also tied in with the Japanese economy. The bubble burst. It had been growing incredibly throughout the 80s. Wow. And then it just kind of went poof and collapsed. Yeah. And they had to recover from that. So let's see. What do I want to talk about with this? Katsuhiro Otomo, the director, he wrote the manga that this is based on. It's 6 volumes, right. 2,200 pages, I think, in total. Wow. And it's pretty much the first half of the first volume, the last half of the last volume, and then a bunch of bits in between, kind of stitching them together, is what the film is composed of. Right. And, so some people who are big fans of the manga are a little bit unsatisfied by this film, but Otomo himself made the choices on what to leave in and what to leave out. So I can't dock it too much. The only thing that really loses context, I think, is there's more about drug culture in the manga. The capsules are this street drug, this party drug, right, that Tetsuo is addicted to in the manga. And so he's already taking this drug, and when he's taken by the government for experiments, he's just given a much stronger dose of that same drug. So he's already sort of primed at the beginning to develop his power. Right. And they just sort of unlocked it by giving him a stronger dose of what he'd already been taking. So that's the only big piece of context I think that's missing from manga to anime. All right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, obviously with this being a first time watch for me, I couldn't sort of sit and say that it feels like it's missing anything. I think, to me, once you get to the ending where Tetsuo sort of morphs into the big thing and everything else, it just start to feel a little bit rushed in trying to explain everything that's going on. Right. Which I think is probably, maybe something that is sort of fleshed out a bit more in the manga. I would imagine, I don't know. But that was the only point I thought that it was getting ahead of itself a little bit, I thought. No, definitely. Definitely. So, yeah, you said this is your first viewing of Akira and that you fell asleep the first time you tried to watch this. I must admit, I fell asleep the second time as well. Oh no! What happened? I've had a very busy. Well, we weren't going to talk about our ailments, but I bit my tongue earlier in the week, and it's just caused me absolute nightmare during sleepy time at night. So and work and children and busy night stalking the streets dressed as Michael Myers. Really didn't help. So I just sort of just kept falling asleep, unfortunately. But to me, it probably was. It was probably a little bit overlong. I'm not the biggest fan of anime, anyway. I've not watched a great deal, though, to be fair. But the story that is there does make a lot of sense to me. You were able to follow it. You were able to follow it, yeah, definitely. It was. I was getting a little bit confused with some of the characters early on. Once they started to sort of do away with some of the gangs and things like that, it was a lot easier because the characters aren't necessarily drawn
different to a lot of characters look the same, I think, in anime anyway. So it's a little bit sort of confusing of who's who and who we're sort of following. But once they sort of got rid of some of those characters and they sort of fleshed them out of the story, then it was a little bit easier for me to get hold of.
Right. Yeah. Otomo's style is very different. He drew a lot of the key drawings. He did all the storyboards himself, which were for all 2,122 shots.
Wow.
And he's received, I guess, criticism for how he draws some of his characters, particularly the girls. There's sort of a traditional way that anime girls are drawn. And so they're like, why do you draw ugly girls? And he said, I try to draw them more realistic and more interesting than sort of the standard expected framework, which I assume is, giant eyes and big boobs and skinny little waist. And
yeah, I mean, the female characters definitely weren't sort of cutesy in this, which you do find in a lot of that sort of anime style. Yeah, for sure. They were much more well-rounded, I suppose, than those interpretations.
Right. Yeah, and I can see how you could confuse some characters. Some of them are very similarly named. You've got Kai and Kei and Kaori.
Yeah.
Kaneda and Tetsuo you get because you hear their names about 1,000 times apiece because they're constantly shouting them at one another.
Yeah.
Which I think, to me, that's the most irritating thing about the movie.
Tetsuo! 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 Kaneda! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Kani! Tetsuo! Kaneda! 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 Tetsuo! 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 Kaneda! Tetsuo! Kaneda! 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 Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! Tetsuo! Kaneda! Tetsuo! 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 Tetsuo!
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think again, that's certainly to the anime that I've seen. It's almost a little bit of a staple. Is that sort of they can get very shouty and people a lot of sort of gritted teeth and growling and shouting each other's names.
Right.
Again, that might just be some of the anime that I've watched. Maybe I don't know. But
no, they kind of save that for the end. Where Canada doing Tetsuo, Canada.
Yeah.
So that's Mr. Canada to you.
I do, I find it quite interesting that they're not necessarily. I mean, you associate the look of sort of anime characters, obviously with Japan and with Asia,
right?
But they're not necessarily drawn to look Japanese. I don't think. I've
At
always
least not to Western eyes. I would say they don't seem Japanese to us, but because that's not our default assumption that we're operating with. This was intended for a Japanese audience, as a lot of anime is. And so they see them, I think a lot of Japanese people see them as Japanese characters that just happen to be drawn in a particular way. But yeah, I would agree, though, that these characters are drawn in a way that does look, to my eyes, more explicitly Asian. Than a lot of traditional anime does, where everybody's got sort of very samey, big, doll eyes kind of thing. Unless you're one of the weird side characters, in which case you get little button eyes and a gigantic mouth. And I don't know why that happens. Apparently a lot of traditions started with Astro Boy and have just continued ever since that period.
Do you think that includes characters running with their arms out to the side?
The Naruto
like
run? That's how it's most commonly known as the Naruto run, with
right.
the arms out behind you like they're wings,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah, that is pretty traditional. But this really did kind of herald a big explosion of anime in the U.S. There had been some before that. You know, I grew up in the 70s and early 80s watching what were imported cartoons from Japan that had been redubbed.
Yeah.
You know, I watched Grandizer, and in the US it was called Battle of the Planets, and I think it's like Space Science Ninjas or something in Japanese.
All right, okay. Yeah, I remember Battle of the Planets in my youth.
And then, of course, Star Blazers, which is Space Battleship Yamato. And those were fantastic. And I was just like, oh, you can do stuff with animation that is not like cutesy little animals jumping around having adventures. You can go to space, and you can fly in giant mech suits, and, you know, all these interesting things.
Oh yeah, and I mean it's ultra violent really in places. This film, I was quite shocked.
Oh, this film, absolutely.
Shocked.
This is rated R animation.
Yeah, I loved it for it. I thought it was I didn't expect it at all, but yeah it was just, you know, it's something that anime do really well. I think is the violence and blood splatters are just fantastic in this sort of anime style.
I think of Akira as a horror movie, honestly.
Yeah,
It's a body horror with sci-fi trappings to it.
The best sort of, because I spoke to somebody about this at work, and they'd never seen it, and the best I could sort of describe it is that it's Japanese anime, but it's almost like if James Cameron made Carrie.
In sort of like with an aliens kind of.
Yeah. It was, but it's, yeah. That's the best way I could think to describe it, really. But it's definitely close to, well, it's horror sci-fi, isn't it, really?
Yes. So I will be interested to see. Apparently it's been in development forever, but they've been planning a live action version of Akira. Somewhere out there online, there's a fan trailer that was made in live action that's supposedly very good quality. I'll have to go hunt that down. But in production right now is live action version of Akira, directed and screenplay by Taika Waititi. So,
all right, okay.
That's going to be interesting. I don't know anything about the casting. That I don't think that's been released yet, if they have cast anyone.
Well, hopefully they'll learn their lesson from some reasonably poor casting decisions by some of the big studios and stuff of late, and stick to a Japanese cast for the most part. I mean, there's not many characters in this that aren't maybe portrayed. I mean, the Colonel, I suppose, I don't know. I get the impression that he's...
Yeah, he has a Japanese name, but...
It does that, doesn't he? Yeah.
He's got that haircut...
And the mustache, yeah.
...is something that I associate with the United States Marine Corps. They call that the high and tight.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's... I wonder if that's sort of symbolic of Japan's relationship with the U.S. military.
Yeah.
You know, as Japan was forbidden from having its own military after World War II, that was part of the, declaration that they signed ending the war is they weren't permitted to have a standing military. So they have kind of had to have what's the word? Some would probably say parasitic. I think it's supposed to be mutual benefit relationship with the U.S. military, and that the U.S. can defend Japan in international disputes.
Okay.
But I'm wondering if that's why the Colonel looks the way that he does, that he looks kind of like a big American to my eyes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
especially the hair.
Yes.
And I think they just were having fun with the executive council and the fact that one of them looks like J. Jonah Jameson and another one looks quite a bit like U.S. talk show host Larry King.
Yes, yeah, it was a very strange scene, that. But I think you find that in a lot of Japanese films in terms of the sort of, that sort of
in joke,
the bureaucracy and all that sort of thing as well. A lot with oh God, what's that? What's the last Toho Godzilla?
Shin Godzilla.
What's that called? Shin Godzilla,
Yeah.
which is all about, it's a film that shouldn't work because it's just basically a monster, and then the government and the military sort of
in meeting rooms
painstakingly trying to figure out what to do.
Yes.
But it just works, and I think the Japanese do those sort of, take the piss out of the bureaucrats quite easily as well.
Yes. Yeah, it reminded me, as Shin Godzilla also does, it reminded me a bit of the Thick of It kind of peek behind the curtain of running government and how none of these people know what they're doing. Everybody's faking it. And, some are just faking it better than others. So, and I also wondered, there's a mole on the executive council, somebody who is sympathetic to the revolutionaries. Yes. And he's drawn in a very strange, much more cartoony, less realistic way than a lot of the characters are. He's very, very short. He has this long, slicked back hair.
Is he the one who sort of has the heart attack while trying to escape with the... Yes. Yeah.
And he has like these, rodent teeth in the front. I'm like, oh, did they like literally think mole and go with that for the character design? Was that on Otomo's mind when he drew this guy? Let's make him look like a mole, with the rodent teeth and the sort of sleek, small, rounded sort of look to him. But I don't know that for sure. I didn't see that in an interview or anything.
Some of the more fascinating characters that I found in terms of their look and the way they were drawn, especially, is the, I believe, are they espers? Is that the right word that she used to describe them? The
espers, the numbers. Some people call them the kids.
The kids, yeah.
But if they're contemporaries of Akira, and Akira destroyed old Tokyo in 1988, then they've got to be in their 30s anyway, really, or almost 40 and possibly. And they just they've got the look of these sort of wizened children, So, but yeah, some call them the espers.
But they're just very fascinating and very sort of, very creepy, very creepy. And just the look of them I found quite unnerving, to be fair. But what about some of the other characters? So obviously our main sort of hero, I suppose, is Kaneda. Canada. It just sounds like I'm saying Canada.
Canada, the one with the coolest motorcycle.
Yes. Oh, it is pretty cool.
Sexiest motorcycle since Tron's light cycles.
But I think he's quite an interesting character because he's not, he doesn't start off as being particularly sort of heroic, and he comes across as very sort of egotistical and a bit of an a-hole, really.
A little bit goofy, even.
Yeah, well, that's it. It almost reminded me, I thought it was a bit sort of Jack Burton from Big Trouble in Little China. He sort of acts the tough guy, but the whole sort of middle section of the film, he's just getting through things by the skin of his teeth, really. And it's sort of letting, is it Kai, the sort of female that he...
Kay. Kai is the shorter of the other gang members.
Yes.
The one who's kind of with him at the end. Yes.
Yeah. I knew I'd get that wrong. I'll probably get it wrong throughout the rest of this discussion as well. So, but yeah, she's very much sort of leading the way and being the strong one until he gets hold of a massive laser gun,
right? And
then sort of comes back into his own.
Yes, yeah, he does acquit himself pretty well toward the end in hand to hand fighting when that comes up, but. Yeah, he's used for comic relief a lot of the time, particularly when they're first, the movie opens with the capsules, which is Kaneda and Tetsuo's biker gang, getting into it with a biker gang called the Clowns on the road. And Tetsuo runs into one of the escaped espers. When a revolutionary has broken this wizened child, psychic person has broken them out of a government facility. And Tetsuo...
I must say, though, the government are very, very poor at keeping these test subjects
they're terrible.
Locked away.
They're the Empire. They got the Stormtrooper Marksmanship Academy out in force trying to catch them.
Yeah.
But, that's another point of the film, is the lack of competence from the government trying to hold on to its fascist tendencies and doing a very poor job of it. Where was I going? Tetsuo almost literally runs into this kid. The kid throws up a force field, and Tetsuo is badly injured when he hits it, going full speed on his bike. And they take him away, and they kind of round up the other gang members along with a bunch of people who were part of a revolutionary protest going on, and kind of interrogate them all in groups in a high school. They're running them through. It's like they've got it set up like a job fair kind of thing, where they're moving them from table to table to be interrogated and screened. And are any of these the kind of kids we're looking for? Are these revolutionaries that need to be spoken to and taken away? And Kaneda has this tremendous comic moment here during his interrogation, where they're like, and you said you were visiting your dying mother. How's she doing? Oh, well, he's making these goofy faces. She's making a remarkable recovery. Thanks. It's so great. And looking, one of the interrogators is looking at a mugshot book, and he spots Kay's picture, and he's like, oh, hey, she's hot. Just kind of leaning over and being weird. And, so it's interesting that he's sort of this relief character. I mean, honestly, he's not very sympathetic, but Tetsuo is almost more the protagonist of the movie, because he's got more of an arc than anybody else has.
Yeah.
At least in terms of his ability. He starts out an insecure second, third banana in the gang.
Yeah.
And he ends up, even though he's got the powers of a god, is still this massively insecure kid.
Yeah.
And it really lends it a tragic quality at the end of the film, especially when his power gets completely out of control.
Yeah. But I thought it was quite sweet that the whole sort of that relationship between Tetsuo and Kaneda, it sort of put across as that he's put down by everybody else, and he's sort of almost sort of bullied by the rest of the gang and everything else. And then you sort of get these, I suppose it's a flashback, or he's sort of seeing his memories, isn't he? And how Kaneda sort of took Tetsuo under his wing a little bit when he was younger and he was a bit lost, and seeing things from a different angle. I thought that was quite sweet at the end.
Yeah, it's a very brotherly kind of relationship. I mean, Kaneda will still insult Tetsuo left and right and calls him an idiot all the time, but it's in the sort of way that an older sibling might do it. It doesn't feel like there's any real malice to it. It's just something that they're not stopping and thinking about. Yeah, I can call my brother an idiot, and it doesn't matter. They're my brother. They know I love them, but they don't stop and think about, if you do this every day for years going on straight, that maybe your little sibling is not going to think you like them if you're constantly calling them an idiot every day. And that's the resentment that's building up in Tetsuo. That's part of the resentment, and that he's not as capable as Kaneda is, even though he would like to think so.
Yeah.
So when he gets the power, he's not 100% sure how to handle it.
And he wants his bike.
Right, and he covets his bike. Which, I mean, who wouldn't, though? That's a cool-ass bike.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, that's what's on the poster and everything as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, and there are clip compilations online that you can look at of the Akira slide homages that have been done to it of when Kaneda first stops his bike on the highway, which they recalled. The only time I've seen it live action was Nope, where Emerald does that with a motorcycle toward the end of the film.
Yes.
That was a very conscious move on Jordan Peele's part. It's like, we had to put the Akira slide in if she was going to be on a motorcycle. We wanted to make sure we got that in there.
Yeah.
Because Jordan Peele is a big nerd, and I love that about him. So, anyway, I'm trying to think if there's any big scenes I really wanted to talk about. There's a few things. One, the first time that Tetsuo really gets like a precognitive strike, the first time he escapes from the facility.
Yeah.
And they've been giving him the drugs, and his power's been unlocked and is starting to grow. And he gets these precognitive flashes, very quick succession. And you hear that bell, ding, Akira, and you get the flash. And I don't know why that is, why the name pops into his head. If it's just that he's sort of plucking it from the memories of the other, the espers, the numbers, the kids, the 3 kids / adults in the facility. They're number 25, 26, and 27. Akira's 28. Kyoko is the girl. She's number 25. Takashi is number 26. He's the sort of gray-haired little boy-looking person. And then Masaru is the sort of rounder,
the chubby one.
Old kid in the hover chair that he uses to get around. And the 3 of, maybe Tetsuo's plucking that out of their memories as his power's growing. He can read minds, but he can't control it. So he's just getting input from a lot of places, I think.
Yeah, I think I assumed that it was that sort of consciousness is sort of shared between the people who the espers and Akira and what Tetsuo is becoming, is that's a shared sort of, they're all part of the same sort of connection, I suppose.
Yes.
Well, whatever it is, this energy, this force. I don't want to say force because that sounds like Star Wars, but this thing.
Right. Yeah, just before the big showdown of the movie at the end, Kyoko refers to Tetsuo as their friend, even though Tetsuo has been nothing but hostile toward them. And I mean, to be fair, they were hostile to him first. I think they tried to lock him down when he was in the facility before he escapes. The second time, they sort of invade his dreams. They give him these hallucinations of these 3 little toys first climbing onto his pillow, and then like this giant teddy bear assembling itself out of all the toys that are in Tetsuo's room that are all, much too young for him.
Yeah.
But they're in there for some reason. I think they're left over from the earlier experiment days.
They're very, very Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, they assemble it into this giant teddy bear, and I find this absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Just the way, it's just so uncanny and upsetting. The fact that it's composed of all these little toys in the big shape of one big toy, and it's sort of looming over him and looking at him and scaring the crap out of him. And then, this giant bunny that I guess is controlled by Kyoko, and then the giant car that Masaru is controlling. And they're scaring the life out of Tetsuo. And, that's something that I haven't figured out yet. I've watched this probably 4 or 5 times. I've seen it once on the big screen. I was very lucky to catch it in like a secret screening one day. And I still haven't figured out why they do this, if it's just that Kyoko has predicted that Tetsuo is going to destroy Neo Tokyo and they have to stop him, and so they have to kill him, or if they're trying to just scare him into shutting down his own power, kind of give him a fear complex that he never wants to access it again and locks himself down somehow. I don't know. I don't know. I'm still chewing on that. I haven't dug into the depths of the internet to research if anybody else has thought on that and come up with an answer. And I haven't read the manga, to be fair. Maybe that's explicit in the manga why they do that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of material missing. It's a 6-volume epic. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's got a lot more breathing room than the animated film has. You said this was a bit long, but they cut so much down to get here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's more, when I say, I could compare this to something that maybe James Cameron was made, I think that's because a bit of it reminded me of Avatar in sort of, especially towards the end, where you think it's coming to a conclusion, and then there's another 40 minutes on the film almost.
Right.
So I think that was why, because you think that this is building up to the big showdown between Kaneda and Tetsuo, which sort of is only really the catalyst for the next sort of fight at the end, between Akira and Tetsuo.
Right.
So I think that's where it perhaps sort of started to feel a bit long to me, and I thought the storytelling and the visuals and just the look and music and everything that is really great about this film, it kept me captive. And I'm not, like I said before, I'm not a big fan of anime. There's a lot of things I find distracting about anime, and normally it makes it very difficult for me to really invest in a film. But I think up until that point, I thought this film was really great and really strong, and just everything that it's sort of lauded to be. And it was, I think from that point it just sort of it lost me a little bit, because I've maybe sort of emotionally sort of got to the end of the story in my own brain, I suppose.
It gets very existential at the end.
Yes. Yeah.
Where it's been very action driven up to that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've thrown in bits of philosophy here and there and a few quiet moments, but it is a very action driven movie for the most part. But yeah, I mean, and Akira has this sort of confrontation with Tetsuo and ends up, I guess, dragging Tetsuo into another dimension where Tetsuo can become his own universe.
Yes.
I think it's sort of the birth of a universe.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, is that where Marvel got Secret Wars? Which is possible. So that's how they explain how the Beyonder is sort of comes to consciousness. I don't know. Anyway, it's a very influential film.
Yeah. Between those two sort of beats in the film, those two sort of, set pieces in the film, there is what I thought was the best shot of the film, and it just totally had me at that point, just before it lost me, is when Tetsuo flies into space to take out the satellite, and everything just goes silent.
Yes.
And it just, a really great scene. I thought that was brilliant.
It is. It's beautiful, and it's brilliant. They bring out Saul, which is a satellite with a laser gun on it, and they up in space, and they just like, okay, this is the most powerful thing we got. Let's shoot our shot here, and they manage to destroy one arm on Tetsuo. Yeah. And, he goes up and destroys it in revenge, and you can see it, re-entering the atmosphere in bits. And it is absolutely a gorgeous shot, and along with the bits of it coming back to Earth. And, but that's where everything kind of really starts to go from wrong to horribly wrong. Because it seems like the overgrowth begins when Tetsuo builds himself like a bionic arm out of the remains, but then it sort of slowly keeps growing as he gets more agitated. You can kind of see it spreading on the arm of the chair-like thing he's sitting in, and as he's being confronted by the colonel, and Kaori's talking to him and trying to kind of talk him down, but she's frightened by the changes to him, and he doesn't like that she's frightened, and it becomes this feedback loop. And he's just a teenage boy, and this poor kid just doesn't know how to handle what is happening to him. He's been given much too much power without the maturity to handle it, which is the world's dumbest thing. And why? I mean, you shouldn't anyway, because it's immoral. But why you shouldn't experiment on children? They don't have the maturity to handle it. It's not a good plan. So,
Yeah, just test on animals instead.
oh, God.
No, don't. do
Ladies
that.
and
I'm
gentlemen, the opinions of Peter Marshall are not necessarily the opinions of everyone on this podcast. So, but anyway.
joking. And on that note,
But I mean, that is
Akira, a very important film.
very important film.
Very important
And what I thought, is a fantastic adaptation from its original comic book material. So much that's terrifying in it, between the Tetsuo just sort of casually being able to bounce out a spherical force field that squishes 8 guards in a hallway, and growing massively into the giant like flesh baby thing with all kinds of parts of his body, and it almost looks like a fleshy mushroom cloud at one point, and obviously very evocative of Japan's history and its fear of technology outpacing its ability to control that technology, and the terrifyingness of Akira being able to reassemble himself out of the cryonically preserved bits that have been
His jars.
in separate jars. That's kind of freaky. I kind of wonder if Watchmen didn't pick up some of that as well, with Dr. Manhattan reassembling himself, because he's this being of sort of cosmic levels of power. And
well, I think it is a very important film, which we keep saying, and I think it's an important stepping stone, because I think you can see a lot of influence, not just from Japanese culture and things like that, a lot of sort of cinematic influences and stuff on it as well. The ending, it's very reminiscent of The Thing. Whether that was an influence, I don't know, but it's sort of in that sort of sweet spot, isn't it, of the changing of sort of cinematic styles, I suppose, and technology, that it's really sort of advanced in terms of animation, not as advanced as things have become in the next sort of 6-7 years, but for its time, it just looks incredible, absolutely incredible.
yeah, it still looks fantastic today. Like I said, I have the 2001 edition. There was a restoration done on the film. So it probably, if you watched the streamlined version, then you watched the unrestored version. I mean, this film is so incredibly detailed and colorful, and a lot of it takes place at night, which is very unusual for animation. And they did some really interesting techniques, and they literally used colors that had never been used before in Japanese animation to render the night scenes, to evoke that, instead of just, slapping a blue filter on everything, as a lot of films, even live action or animation, will do. It's like, let's make everything blue and then you'll know it's nighttime. And they were like, no, well, let's use reds and browns and yellows, and we'll just dim everything and make it, deeper and darker. And it worked. It looks amazing. It looks amazing. The lights look like they're glowing, and the lighting up the night, and you get light trails from the motorcycles, and can't recommend this film highly enough.
No, it's very important film. Very important
This
film.
really opened the door, in the West for people to say, oh, animation doesn't just have to be for children.
Yes, yeah, for definite. Okay. Well, if you've got nothing else to add, we shall take.
I have so many things I could add, but I'm not going to. I will take pity on you.
We will take a short break, and we'll be back shortly. Okay, right.
Welcome to the intermission.
Oh, that might be like I might clip that for the future ones. So, welcome to the intermission. This is part of the episode in which I ask my co-host a random question, a question they've not prepared for, and get their honest first answer. So, Nicole, are you ready?
I love being unprepared. Okay, yes.
Yay. So, here is your question for this episode. What is the worst decision ever made by a character in a film?
Oh, God. All right. I'm sure there are worse ones that involve being like, wait, I got to go back for X thing that is utterly replaceable. But I think the one that seems to keep happening because people can't resist is, hey, let me play with this puzzle box. And that tends to go poorly for literally everyone who does it.
Yeah. Well, everybody likes a challenge, don't they? You've got to try and... it's just human nature.
Yeah.
You've got to have a fiddle with something.
It's just, very common in horror movies you don't leave until it's too late. You don't try to leave until it's too late. Could have left if you'd gone earlier, but it's too late.
Well, I mean, that question sort of sprung to mind because this week I watched, and I did put it in our little sort of Movie Duellist group chat that I watched Speak No Evil for the first time this week, and there's quite an epic bad decision in that film.
Oh, dear.
Which there are many. Yeah. But one in particular. Have you seen that?
No, but I've heard about it.
Yes, there's one that involves a decision that involves a rabbit. I'll say no more than that, but anybody who's seen the film will know exactly what I mean.
Okay, here's a parenting tip. If your kid has a favorite stuffed animal, you buy another one and you hide it in your closet. So if the original goes missing, you scuff up the replacement one and you sneak that in. You say, oh, my goodness, so-and-so has been to the spa. They've come back. And now they're nice and clean.
It's not always easy. I mean, my daughter's favourite one, it was her mum's when she was little, My Football Monster.
Wow.
Which is a big sort of purple thing that originally came with a American football helmet. So that's not an easy one to replace in this day and age. Not
eBay.
Yes. I would imagine it's very extortionate prices on eBay.
Could be. But yeah.
Well, there we go. Okay, so we'll call that the end of the intermission. Thank you very much, Nicole. And we'll head back to the main discussion. Yes, so on to my choice. Now, there wasn't a great deal once it sort of sifted through the things that were offshoots of DC and Marvel that I couldn't really pick, The Crow being one of them. But I did briefly consider Kick-Ass. Not Kick-Ass 2, though, but Kick-Ass I really enjoyed. But not as much as my choice for this episode, which is Sin City from 2005.
framed for murder, and the cops are in on it.
Open up, police.
I'll be right out. Looking for Nancy Callahan?
Eyes to the stage, Pilgrim. She's just warming up.
Made a terrible mistake. We need to get out of here. Break this second. This clown's out of control. I followed him here to make sure he didn't hurt any of the girls.
Us helpless little girls.
It's time to prove to your friends that you're worth a damn. Sometimes that means dying. Sometimes it means killing a whole lot of people. Walk down the right back alley in Sin City, and you can find anything.
Directed by Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller, with guest director Quentin Tarantino. First time Quentin Tarantino's popped up on the podcast as well, which is great. Sin City stars, to name but a few. I'm not going to name them all because I'll be here all night.
It's a big cast.
Jessica Alba, Benicio del Toro, Brittany Murphy, Clive Owen, Mickey Rourke, Bruce Willis, and Elijah Wood. It tells the story of an exploration of the dark and miserable Basin City and 3 of its residents, all of whom are caught up in violent corruption. So, it's based on the Dark Horse comics of the same name, written by Frank Miller, first released in 1991. And I actually remember reading it. Must have been some kind of anthology sort of graphic novel of Sin City. I remember renting it or borrowing it from the local library, and I must have been 14, maybe 13, 14, when I think, little old English librarians didn't really know what these these grown-up sort
How
of
many
comic
boobs
books
were in there?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Around about the same time, actually, they had a copy of the sort of graphic novel sort of comic book interpretation of Bram Stoker's Dracula as well. And I remember getting that out at the time, and they had some Aliens and Alien versus Predator sort of graphic novels as well. And they really didn't sort of keep tabs on them, and I think they just assumed that they were just, quote unquote, comic books. So it was quite eye-opening to me, and Sin City in particular, it was just what Frank Miller wanted to do was basically draw the stuff that he loved to draw, which was, sort of fast cars and, hot women, action and guns and things like that. And he just enjoyed drawing them. And this was the basis of Sin City. And me as a, 13, 14-year-old just sort of lapped it up, really. It was very eye-opening to what comics and comic books could be. Well,
the comic's in a very unusual style, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it is sort of, this film has a lot of sort of colour sort of peppered into it, and it has actual sort of blood splatters and bits and bobs of colour all over the place. But the comic book doesn't have anything, I don't think. I think the blood's all white from what I remember. I was hoping to try and track down a copy so I could read it again, but
it does have colour, as I remember, in the volume that focuses on that yellow bastard.
Yes. Yeah.
They do have the yellow in there, but otherwise, it's primarily black and white. And very stark black and white.
Yes, it is. It's incredibly stark. And you sort of think, how can they interpret this into film? And it's so close to the book. It's so close. I looked at some of the comparisons of, some of the scene comparisons and the sort of stills from the comic book compared to what they actually shot for the film, and it's quite eerie how close they are to those interpretation to that interpretation. And Robert Rodriguez, considers this a translation rather than an adaptation of the comic book, and you can totally see that. I think. Even, the performances, just to touch on the acting a little bit overall, I think everybody has just got the right sort of performance. It reminded me of Liam Neeson in Darkman, where the tone of his acting was just right. And I think the vast majority, almost everybody in this film, has got the tone quite spot on to what you would expect from this kind of comic book. The only exception I would say is probably Michael Madsen, who doesn't seem to get it right.
No, I don't think he quite does. I'm not sure Jessica Alba does either. 100%.
Yeah, I can see that. I can understand that. Yeah,
she's a little too innocent for where she works.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. That is very true, actually.
But I mean, that's something that they kind of did, a change that they made in her character. Anyway, they toned it down a little bit in that, in the comics,
Yes.
she is nude when she's dancing. She's not, she doesn't have her bikini top on. And they added that for, presumably, Jessica Alba had a no nudity clause.
Yes. Yeah.
But it sort of made her seem younger and more naive than you would be if you worked in a burlesque/strip bar. Yeah.
But I think everybody sort of hits that sort of that sort of comic book noir sort of tone for this film. The voiceovers, the narrations, each of the so you've got Mickey Rourke, Clive Owen. I mean, Clive Owen's quite close to the mark. I think he was very much in danger of going a little bit too far with it, I think. And then obviously Bruce Willis as well, who provide the sort of the narration over each of their segments. But it just works. I again watch it on rewatch. I can't believe how well it works in general. For this could have been handled so poorly and just completely, I think, in the completely wrong hands. It would have just looked absolutely terrible and played through absolutely terrible as well. But I think you've got people like Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino who know that tone so well, and Tarantino especially, it has that in a lot of his films as well, where they're not super serious, even though a lot of the subject matter is very serious, and he knows just how far to push it. And I suppose Robert Rodriguez as well. I suppose the tone of his films are very much like that.
Usually, occasionally he goes a little overboard.
Yeah, he's maybe not as subdued as Tarantino. That sounds really weird to say, but I know what I mean. I know what I mean in my own head. But for a film that's just cliche after cliche, really, and that's what it is. It's just absolute sort of noir and comic book cliche after the other. And for me, it just works so well. Yeah. What's your sort of background with Frank Miller? Is he somebody that you've looked at a lot of his work?
I have. I've actually read a fair amount of his work. I was a big fan of his work. He did this fairly long run on the Daredevil comic that was absolutely gorgeous. He did Sin City. I've read several of the volumes of Sin City. I don't think I've read all of them quite. And of course, he did 300, which is a fairly faithful adaptation. And apparently to do faithful adaptations of Frank Miller's work, you need green screens, because that was both 300 and Sin City are almost entirely green screen, except for the props that they're using. All the backgrounds and settings are green screen. But I had read, so I was a fan of his artwork I don't know so much the writing necessarily. And I did see Sin City in the theaters. I had read some of the comic before that. I did go to the theater to see it. I was very impressed with the visuals of it. I do think it's a little bit uneven, but we can get to that when we get to that. We get to plot and flow and all that. But yeah, I think I remember hearing there's some things Frank Miller is not so necessarily great of a person, but I haven't dug into a lot of detail on that. Like I said, I'll just say the art style is very distinctive, very cool. It's sort of oddly squared off in places where you wouldn't normally see that. And I think it lends his characters a very interesting look.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favourite sort of Frank Miller's works, I suppose, is Dark Knight Returns, which was his sort of middle Batman offering.
Yes, I've read that as well.
Which is just fantastic. Really great, interesting sort of look at the Batman mythos. There's this sort of, it's been adapted in various different ways across the different iterations of Batman in the cinema. But I would thoroughly recommend that to anybody who likes Frank Miller and likes Batman, really, because it is a really interesting story that's pretty much got the whole of the major Rose catalogue, and they're all sort of old and interesting.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Or really interesting. But yeah, let's sort of break it down. So I think it's probably the best way to sort of skim through this film is go through segment by segment. And I think it's interesting just to quickly sort of talk about the opening segment, which is called The Customer is Always Right, which we won't go into too much unless you've got anything you really want to say about it. But
just that I quite like it. I think it's very well done. It's a good introduction to it.
So this was actually the first thing they shot standalone, and this was basically made to convince Frank Miller to let them make the film, basically. So this was shot as a screen test to show to Frank Miller.
Right. Sort of proof of concept kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously, quite rightly, it convinced him that the film could be made. So, well, we get the sort of continuity is a little bit off, isn't it, really, with the segments? But let's start with The Hard Goodbye, which is probably the first sort of fleshed out segment of the film. So this is Mickey Rourke as Marv, who's the sort of meathead of our story. How did you rate this segment?
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, Marv is a tough character to play. In the comics, he's very, very... It's clear that this man is psychotic, and his medications are all that are really keeping him in check, but he's using and abusing them willy-nilly, and so he's very uneven in terms of his ability to control himself and what he thinks is reality and what isn't. So that it is tricky to play that in a way that is sympathetic. And I think Mickey Rourke does a fairly good job. The makeup is a little stiff. I think there's not enough movement in it to convince me that that's the real shape of his face. But I think he does a good job with what he's got. I think he does almost as well as one could do, I think, with this character.
Yeah, well, I think he's despite certain things, he's a very likable character. He has quite a good sort of strong moral compass when it comes to women, or to dames as he calls them in this film, to a degree. He talks about not hitting women and or not wanting to, and he's quite sort of protective of the female characters in the story throughout, really.
Right.
Whether it's
nice low bar to start with, and he clears it.
yeah. But yeah, I like the look. I mean, I can see what you're saying about, maybe just looks that unnatural. I think that adds to it. I think it just makes him look just meaner and more badass. To be fair, I think it's.
Yeah, Mickey Rourke's not a big dude,
No, and certainly by 2004, he wasn't looking like a million. He wasn't looking like he was in the 80s. So it's, you could argue it's a bit of an improvement, to be fair.
Boxing did his face no favors, unfortunately.
No, certainly not. But you've also got probably one of the creepiest performances of the 2000s in this section. Elijah Wood completely brushing off any sort of remnants of Frodo Baggins and turning into this sort of cannibal ninja, I suppose. Is the best way to put it.
The glasses, yeah.
Yeah, it's just so creepy. But again, it looks really close to what is in the comic books as well.
Yes, definitely.
And he's beheading women and eating them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew?
I think he's on the whiteboard in Cabin in the Woods. Somewhere on that list is Kevin.
Yes, he is.
I think this is him.
Yeah, that's true. But he's also sharing them with Rutger Hauer as well, who, yes, is incredibly creepy as well. But then, so in the sort of middle section of the film, we move to the Big Fat Kill, which is the section directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Is it the whole section, or was it just the dialogue in the car? I thought was Quentin Tarantino.
Oh, was it? I thought it was the whole section. I could be wrong. I could have badly researched this, but this is the one that he has a sort of handle in. I mean, that would make sense. That is a very Tarantino-esque sort of exchange.
Yeah.
And
this is the most Tarantino-esque segment, though. This could certainly could have done the whole thing. So
absolutely. I think, to be fair, I think he's probably, you can see a bit of his hand across the whole of this film. I doubt that he came in and just did one bit of this film. I think it's probably, he was probably on set quite a bit during the making of this film. Right. I would imagine.
I mean, yeah, they were buddies.
Yeah. Which I always thought was quite a weak point of this of the film, but I enjoyed it a lot more on this rewatch. Particularly Benicio del Toro, who's I just think is just such a fascinating actor anyway, and he just takes the smallest sort of, or what can be a very plain role, and just adds so much to it. You've seen do that in things like Usual Suspects and various other things that he's been in. Even in the MCU with the Collector, is that his name?
Yeah.
Very short and sweet sort of performances, but he just adds something to it, and he is such a sleaze in this film to begin with, and he's got this sort of prosthetic nose as well, which is just fantastic.
Yeah, it took me a minute to figure out what was weird about his face. I had forgotten that he had the prosthetic on.
It kind of reminded me of The Shadow. Can you remember The Shadow with Alec Baldwin?
Yes, Alec Baldwin and that terrible prosthetic nose. Yeah.
Yeah, and he ends up looking like his brother when he's got this prosthetic nose on. Anyway, that's by the by. But just that exchange in the car as well, where he's obviously he's been turned into a Pez dispenser by Komiko, I think her name is.
Miko. No, Miho.
Miko.
Deadly little Miho.
Miho.
Yeah.
Miho, that's it. And so his voice, as his neck's going back and his head's coming forward, it just changes the,
It's nearly Headless Nick.
Yes. But yeah, again, just a great little segment. Like I say, I think Clive Owen is borderline. I think there's points where he could just slightly go over the top and just manages to not do that.
It's almost campy noir, but not quite. Not 100%. I mean, it does I think it veers a little into campy with Benicio del Toro, honestly.
Really? Okay.
Especially the conversation in the car, the Tarantino-y bit. It gets a little campy. But I got to tell you, in this segment, Rosario Dawson making me feel all kind of feelings in this film.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. She's, yeah. Yeah.
Short and to the point,
For
Peter.
sure.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, to be fair, Miho was making me funny as well, to be honest. Despite the fact that she's making Pez dispensers out of people and throwing all sorts of things through people as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. But while we are on Clive Owen, actually, he is our X-Files connection of the episode.
He is?
He is. There was actually, not that I could find, and I searched and searched and searched. There was no direct link to the X-Files in terms of an actor or member of the crew or anything like that. The closest link I could find is that Clive Owen actually auditioned for the role of John Doggett that eventually went to Robert Patrick.
Oh, okay. Replacement Mulder.
So in around 2001, he auditioned for the role of John Doggett. So that's the closest I could find for this episode.
I think that was a good miss for him. I think that was of benefit to him to have not gotten that part.
Absolutely. But also in this section, actually, you get, and I don't think I've read enough of Frank Miller's stuff to know whether or not it's a common theme, but there's this sort of swastika-shaped throwing weapon that I believe Miho uses in this film, but also in the Dark Knight Returns. There's this very sort of Amazonian, Russian-looking, possibly German character that's covered in swastikas as well. So I don't know whether it's just kind of a fascination with him. I don't know.
I would hope that it's taken from the Buddhist history of that symbol. You'll find swastikas on like a lot of temples, especially in India. It's something that the Third Reich co-opted for their own purposes. It existed long before them. So I'm hoping that that's what he was going with that. But it's a risky thing to play with, even if you're putting it in the hands of an Asian character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I've in any sort of research that I've done on Frank Miller, I know there's some icky bits in there, but as far as I can see, he's not in any way any kind of Nazi sympathizer or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that, but it just seems it's not that those swastikas have been sort of glamorized in any way in anything that I've seen that he's done and used them. It was just quite fascinating to me that it sort of popped up again when it doesn't necessarily shout out for it being there being a reason for it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
In the Dark Knight Returns, it's obviously meant to be some kind of sort of radical character that's not very nice, and it sort of suits that. But here, it's being used as a weapon by one of the quote unquote good guys of the story, I suppose. But yes, so we've got this sort of overarching story then that sort of starts near the beginning and finishes us off in that Yellow Bastard, which is the sort of Bruce Willis, Jessica Alba segment, which starts off very heroic and giving the dirty paedophile his comeuppance, and sort of ends a little bit creepy for me, I thought, this time around.
This gives me the ick.
Yeah, it did sort of... Yeah, it didn't sit right with me this time round.
I mean, this is... beyond the, I don't know, beyond the age difference, there's the power imbalance. There's the, he's a police officer and then he's in jail. And so that sort of swings back and forth power-wise, gets traded. But it's just, you meet someone when they're 8 and then reunite when they're 18 and be like, oh, hey, wow, this person's super attractive. I mean, to be fair, at least in the story, Bruce Willis manfully resists her advances for a long time.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think only ends up kissing her.
Yeah. Yeah. Mercifully, it doesn't go that far.
Yeah, I remembered it being worse than this, but I was very happy on a rewatch to see that there's just a kiss or two in here, but it still squicks me out.
Yeah, and I think it's almost slightly sort of role reversal, I suppose, is that, she's the one who's sort of coming on to him rather than the other way around, which obviously would have been a lot worse. But you don't necessarily expect that. You sort of...
Yeah. But I mean...
she comes on quite strong to him as well, I suppose. And
I think part of the ickiness is the unlikeliness of that. Hero worship or no.
Yeah.
It's still...
Yeah.
And Bruce Willis, not an unattractive man, but not attractive enough for an 18-year-old to be like, whoa, and just...
No.
Throw everything over.
Well, he's meant to be a bit more of a humdrum sort of character as well, isn't he? He's not meant to be the sort of...
I think the comic, he's not even that level of good looking.
No. Exactly, and he talks about his, the roast dinner his wife's going to have ready for him when he gets home and all that sort of thing. So he's very humdrum, he's not a brash sort of cop and, throwing out one-liners and stuff like that. He's literally just sort of rescued her and shot the dick off the paedophile who's about to do unspeakable things. Which is pretty... The best part of this segment is, as creepy as he is, Nick Stahl probably does go very close to that line that I've talked about.
Yeah.
Very much.
I wish they'd designed the makeup a little bit differently. I mean, it matches the comic book very closely, but I wish they had adapted it just a little bit more.
It's the part where he is sort of pretty much naked with the whip and stuff, and you can see his belly and all that really, I suppose it's designed to really sort of make you feel even sicker about this character. But, I think that the earlier part of that second segment where he's in the sort of trench coat and he's in the bar and everything else, I think that it sort of pulls it off just. But it's when he's naked and he's got this sort of pot belly and...
The body didn't bother me. It was more just the roundness of the head and the roundness of the nose and the roundness of the ears all put together made it very cartoony.
But yes, it is a bit of an icky end.
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I was like, what could be done to improve it? And I think you need to either end with... I mean, you still end up going out kind of sad if you end with Marv and the hard goodbye. I think if you end with Dwight, Clive Owen's segment, that's got the kind of happy ending to it,
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think so.
If you go out on that note, it leaves you with a more positive feeling about the movie.
But then I suppose that's not the point of the story and of the comic, is it? It's meant to be a very nihilistic sort of story. These little snippets of Sin City are meant to be kind of depressing.
Yeah.
But cool.
Yes, depressing but cool.
For the most part. Depressing but cool. A bit like Tom Waits.
The piano has been drinking. I can do Tom Waits now with my with the cough I've got right now.
And then you've got this sort of little epilogue with the girl from The Big Fat Kill, the one who phoned in the who was the mole, I suppose, who sort of grassed up there.
Right, Gilmore Girls, Alexis
Yeah, I
Bledel.
can't remember the character's name. Yes, that's the one. Only to be met by the assassin from The Customer Is Always Right, which was the only original scene in the film that's not in any of the comics.
You know, you could do worse if you got to go out and having Josh Hartnett take you out.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. As long as he hasn't got his sort of 1999, 2000.
Oh, the haircut, yeah. The faculty
sort of-
era haircut.
Yeah, I don't even know. I need to find out what that haircut's called because it's just so fascinating. Because it's just sort of out, but
Yeah.
solid. It's weird. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had a lot of affection for Josh Hartnett since there was a very brief-lived American version of Cracker,
Oh yeah.
and he played the son
Oh,
in that, and I thought he did very well. So I've sort of been watching him since then.
Who played Cracker in that?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna get this wrong. I want to say the guy who played the painter on Murphy Brown.
Oh, Robert Pastorelli.
Yes, yeah, Robert Pastorelli. That's him. Yeah,
I've got no idea who he is. Not a clue.
yeah. Did a lot of television, so not a lot in film. So he might not have gotten any fame across the pond, as our TV doesn't cross pollinate so much as our films do. So
Okay, so what would you say is your favourite segment of Sin City?
probably the Big Fat Kill with Clive Owen and Rosario Dawson, and the is Converse and the Brittany Murphy and Benicio del Toro. You know, the sort of interwoven. I think the most effective horrific bits are with Marv. And you didn't mention Carla Gugino as his parole officer / victim of Kevin.
Yes.
And she acquits herself well, and she's got one of the more horrific moments. And I wonder if that's what sort of first gave Mike Flanagan the idea to bring her into the fold of his stable of actors.
Yes. A bit of early hand trauma for her as well. That it obviously replicates in Gerald's Game, although a lot more horrific than this one.
I have not watched that. I read that and I'm like, you know what? I don't need to see that rendered on screen. That was vivid enough in my head. So
Yeah, it is pretty creepy and disturbing. But yeah, I mean, I would say The Hard Goodbye. I think the Marv story, I vividly remember that as well from the graphic novel version that I read of Sin City. It definitely had The Hard Goodbye and it definitely had that yellow bastard. I don't know. I can't remember if the Big Fat Kill was in that as well. But I definitely remember the Hard Goodbye in that, and it probably is one of the most famous of the Sin City comic books as well.
yeah, I think that's another reason why I don't like the Bruce Willis segment being the ending. You know, it's sort of split up. I think you get some at the beginning and some more toward the end, and I think it's the weakest story. So I feel like if you've got something with multiple segments, you want to end on the strongest one you got. You know, you want to kick it off with the second strongest and then close with the strongest one.
Mm-hmm.
And VHS makes this mistake regularly of not putting these in the right order.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, to wrap up for me on Sin City, I just think it just looks so lush. It just looks so much like a comic book. And, this is probably, other films have sort of tried it and sort of done it, another minor consideration for me, I think we mentioned when we was talking about originally when I came up with the subject was Scott Pilgrim versus the World, which tries to do that as well. I don't think it pulls it off as well as Sin City. Just visually, it just looks like a comic book. It feels like a comic book, and you're just totally taken into that comic book world.
Although I do love Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
Yeah, it is good. It is good. And, it's not overlong. It keeps you interested. It keeps up the pace. The acting for what it is and the tone, as I've said, I think is just pretty much on the mark.
Yeah. And that's a tough job, acting on green screen.
The music as well. The music is so, again, just fits the tone of the film completely. This sort of saxophony, drudgy sort of sound.
Now, I don't remember. Did Rodriguez do the music himself, or did he hire someone else?
I don't think so.
Because I know he's got a band.
I meant to look this up. It was... I had a hand in it, but John Debney, Graham Revel, and Robert Rodriguez.
Okay.
So yeah, he had a hand in it, but yeah, it is that sort of typical, again, what you'd expect from that sort of film noir-y sort of saxophony, slightly sort of rock soundtrack that, it just works. Everything just fits in this film, I think. And, stylistically, it's just... I've said it before, I'll say it again, lush. It just feels lush.
Yes. It is beautifully
crafted.
It's well crafted. It's very... the cinematography is remarkable for the black and white. It really looks like they crafted it, with an eye to it being black and white rather than just shooting color and converting it and just accepting it with whatever, palette of grays you end up with.
Yeah.
I think they probably made some really good choices in order to get the effect that they were looking for in the right kind of shading. I thought it was really interesting. I saw a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, how they put red tape on Marv to be that eye-popping white that you get in the final product. And I'm not sure how that works, but it is a really neat effect to have that sort of those glowing pops of white as well as pops of color.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's masterful. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, it is beautiful to look at. Absolutely.
And again, like I said earlier on, I'd recommend looking up some of the side-by-sides of the original, the comic book and the scenes from the film. It's quite fascinating to see.
Oh. And one thing I did write down, blink and you'll miss it. He's on screen just like a couple times for a couple seconds. Nick Offerman as Schlub.
Yes, yeah,
He's
I did notice that.
Blonde and bearded, I believe.
Yeah.
He's got like a blonde buzz cut.
And Frank Miller's in it as well. He plays the priest who Marv confesses to as well.
Yes.
But yes, there we go. I mean, I don't think Akira was, although it's a very important film, as we've established, I don't think it was enough to convince me that I'm wrong on this one. I think this, I don't know, I just enjoy, I think they're both very technically proficient films. They work for what they are, but this Akira didn't blow me away compared to, and I certainly think Sin City is more of an enjoyable film for me.
Well, I would say the reverse of that. So,
well, you would do,
but I'm not gonna yuck your yum. I think they both are very good adaptations of their source material.
Yeah, definitely.
I think they're the best that could be done from one medium to another. in their faithfulness and in both in the look and the spirit of it. I think they're both very successful in what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I would definitely, for anybody who's not seen Akira, who maybe, anime is not for them, or, it's not particularly their
cup of tea.
Something that they gravitate towards, their cup of tea. I would thoroughly recommend watching it because it is just, again, like I said about Sin City, it just looks so fantastic.
Right.
And it is, I sound like I'm taking the piss now, but it is a very important film, and you can see that in it, and you can, not just when you read about the history of the film, but you can see that it is that sort of next step in cinema,
right?
Really, not just Japanese cinema.
Yes, yeah, definitely. If you want to go get your toes, dip your toes in anime, just be aware that Akira has a lot. It is very bloody. If you want slightly less bloody, not 100% less bloody, but slightly less bloody, dip your toe in Ghost in the Shell. I would recommend. That one's a little bit more esoteric. I don't know. It's got a lot to do with AI and consciousness, and it's a little more philosophical, I would say. But yeah, I mean, Sin City also proved that you can do movies that are almost entirely green screen and save a lot of money. Robert Rodriguez continually proves that you don't have to have the biggest budgets in the world to make movies that look good, because he's got his own thing going on down in Texas. Sort of his own studio. He's got his own recording studio set up. He's got his own little cottage industry right there in his backyard, so to speak. So
just don't look any further than Sin City, because A Dame to Kill For is not great, and The Spirit is even worse.
But Spy Kids.
Well, yeah, Rodriguez, but his sort of the Frank Miller adaptations past Sin City, just give them a wide berth. Yeah. Even if A Dame to Kill For does have Eva Green in it, who I'm totally in love with. Yeah. But again, we're going to get off on a tangent there. And yeah, well, I think we'll have to put this episode to the polls and see if we can get a decision on this one.
All right then.
Hopefully, it won't end up with a draw again, but you'll see. We need answers, people. You need to head to the polls. Yes. You need to head over to X, to Twitter, or whatever the hell it's called, because that's the only place I can put a poll up, and vote. And vote in your masses, please. We need to find an answer to this one.
And where should they vote? What's the ID?
It's at Movie Duel Pod on X.
There you go.
Yeah. I normally add all that bit at the start.
Okay.
But yes, thank you very much for joining me on this episode, Nicole. See, next time around, it'll be your choice of subject.
Twill.
We shall reconvene then, and just leaves me to say goodbye, and for you to say...
I get confused when I don't take my medicine.